One of the questions people ask is, why is it hard to control the economy? Probably the easiest example that I can think of is a ship. When a ship is cruising across the ocean, it's hard to turn it around. It takes quite a while before you can actually turn around and go back with a ship. So I think about the economy as like a ship. It takes quite a while for any sort of policy changes to actually take effect. And it doesn't matter whether it's monetary policy or fiscal policy, whether the Fed is making the decisions and making the changes on interest rates, or the Congress and the President are changing spending or taxing policies. Either way, it's going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years for anything to actually really make a big difference. And you can think about the TARP bill in 2008 or 2007, and in response to the recession, it took several years. Even though that recession period was only 2 years, it took several more years for people to actually be beyond or to get past that recessionary impact. The other thing is the budgetary process is really dominated by uncontrollable expenditures. And we talked about that in the last chapter, those uncontrollable expenditures, things that are already determined. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, things that are automatically going to increase based on economic measures of inflation. And those are entitlements. Those entitlements can't be undone easily. Between the fact that monetary and fiscal policies take so long to actually go into effect, to have an impact, and the fact that the budget is so controlled by uncontrollable expenditures, makes it difficult to control the economy at all. Even in a capitalist system, the private sector is controlled in part by the public sector. The private sector is a lot bigger than the public sector, but still, the federal government alone spends about 25% of the GDP, or a different way to put it is that of all the goods and services that are produced in a single year in the United States, federal spending makes up about 25% of that. The majority of our economy is based on consumers and businesses who make and spend money. This next section is on international economy, and our goal is to be able to analyze the impact of the global economy on the American economic policy. And this is where I mentioned before, even in Hamilton's and Washington's and Madison's time period in the 1780s and 90s, we were part of a global economy. But that's increased quite a bit through globalization. In the U.S., in 2008, foreign companies or individuals or governments owned about $23 billion in American assets, something that was American, but because of loans or bonds or whatever, other foreign people or foreign entities had control and ownership of that much of U.S. assets. At the same time, in 2008, Americans owned about $20 billion in foreign assets. And so there's this sort of asset deficit. That asset deficit continues on to today. We're at about a $10 billion deficit between how much foreign entities own U.S. interests and how American entities own foreign interests. One of the ideas or beliefs is that the United States ought to protect American businesses, and that's known as protectionism. If the United States makes American and buys American in this theory of protectionism, then we're protected against the negative effects of globalization. And President Trump has used and believed in a protectionist theory during his presidency. One of the ways that he shows that is through tariff policy. And tariffs are taxes on imports, if you remember that from Basic Economy. So President Trump has proposed a number of tariffs on foreign goods, things coming in maybe from China or from Europe. And by putting a tax on those imported goods, it raises the actual price of those goods to Americans. Maybe an American company can make shoes for $5 and then charge American consumers $50 for a pair of shoes. A foreign country might be able to produce those same shoes for $2 and be able to sell those shoes for $40 instead of $60. A tariff would be a government-imposed tax that would make the price of those foreign shoes higher for American buyers, and in a way make American companies more competitive. So protectionists will often employ those kinds of strategies as a way of helping the American economy and businesses in some way. But there's no question that we are part of a global economy. And one of the organizations that's part of a treaty, a World Trade Treaty that was put into place years ago, is the World Trade Organization. And because we're part of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, we as a country have to follow some rules that are created by an international organization. And the purpose of this organization is to promote free trade, to basically make government regulation over companies and business as minimal as possible. And some of these international trade policies create some really long-term benefits, but often include really short-term pain. And for Americans, international organizations deciding American business practices are a hard pill to swallow. On the other hand, American multinational corporations often and most often benefit from free trade across the globe, because then they aren't limited by other countries' regulations on their products and their businesses. So it's a trade-off that sometimes is a benefit and sometimes is a problem for American businesses. Generally, markets gain for American businesses in developing countries can cost jobs at home. So by outsourcing jobs to other countries, American businesses benefit, but American workers lose those jobs. This is a graph that shows this difference over a period of time between imports and exports. I'm going to give you a few seconds just to look at this graph and read it and do a little analyzing of this graph.